to invite you to stand as we begin with the playing of taps. Seated. I always feel like I'm supposed to give an invocation after that. My name is John Houghton. I am the president of the Board of the Historical Society, so on behalf of my fellow board members and of our friends at the Culver Union Township Public Library who invented this event some years ago, I'm happy to welcome you to Stories and Stones for 2025. This is the last Historical Society program for the summer, but we do have a holiday program coming up on December 9th. And as is my custom, I'll mention that if you would like to be a member and somehow manage to avoid getting one of our incessant requests to become a member, we'd be happy to put you on the list for this year. If you speak to James Mechling-Smith a little later, he'll be happy to add you to our mailing list for this fall's membership campaign. I shall also mention that there is water here in case you get thirsty. There are donuts afterwards. Please don't leave without getting some. And with that, it's my pleasure to thank our sponsors, the Lions Club, who are particularly important because they provided the chairs in which you are sitting, the Park and Shop, which I think provided the cider, the library, as I said, and here's James Mechling-Smith, who is the chair of this year's program.
Thank you, everyone, for showing up. We have a really nice program for you this year. We have 5 very interesting people presented by 5 great actors. And next I'm going to introduce Jeff Kenney, who's going to be emceeing this event.
All right. Welcome, everyone. Great to see you. I want to, before I forget, extend thanks to Kolton Kasalek, with the band unit over at Culver Military Academy for playing taps for us, and his counselor, Kevin Bowman, for driving him over just for that. So really appreciate that. Just to get us started, we're going to begin with Robert Keller Kyle, or Killer Kyle as he was known, presented by Joe Fox.
Good afternoon, I'm Robert Kyle, Bob. The Killer part is it's not something that I live up to. Middle name is Keller, so I think that's just what my fellow reporters enjoyed calling me, Killer. If you were readers of the Culver Citizen back in the 1970s, you would have known me as Lakewater. And that was the column that I wrote was called It Must Be the Lakewater. And I worked for the Citizen up until around the time that I died in 1979. I was born in 1898, so I lived a nice long life. I was born over in Bourbon, and from what I understand, my family owned what must have been the largest poultry operation in the state at the time. So we had a lot of chickens. My parents owned a plumbing and heating business, so that folded, I think, around 1920. I went to Purdue. Writing was always an interest of mine. I wrote for the university paper, and then I eventually worked for the Lafayette Journal and Courier. But after Dad died, we sold the plumbing business and we moved to Indianapolis. Eventually, I would move on to New York City, and I worked in the magazine field until her squeezed me out of a job. The early 1920s, I got a job with the New York Tribune, and in 1922, I ended up back with Hearst until about 1929. So I was a man who moved around a lot with the times. And I covered some big stories, some ones that you've probably heard of too. In 1925 was the Scopes trial, so you probably have heard of the Scopes trial. That was as a publicist for First National Pictures. I also worked for Fox Motion Picture Company too. So I was a publicist, I was a journalist, I did a little bit of everything. In 1927, I covered the armed robbery trial of Sacco and Vanzetti. So another story you might remember from your history classes. Met Mildred in 1938, and we moved to Culver in 1938. And at that time, I began working for the Indianapolis Star, and I commuted to Indianapolis from Culver every single week. And then by the 1970s, I was working as a news editor for the South Bend News Times. And another thing you might remember, depending on how long you all go back in Culver, was I did reenactments of James Whitcomb Riley. Something I did in my free time. So I played the character. I also chaired the Marshall County Bicentennial Commission back in 1976. So I lived a nice, long, and interesting life. You can find me, I think, actually, no, I'm right over that way. Thank you all.
All right. I shouldn't insert this, but since we mentioned the Scopes monkey trial, I'd feel remiss not to mention the two major players, the two attorneys. William Jennings Bryan's son was at the Culver Naval School, and the other one, Clarence Darrow, defended the bank robbers who robbed the bank in 1920 here in Culver. So that trial has three Culver connections now. Our next presentation is Emily Wheelock Reed, presented by Kylie Jamrozy.
Hello, good afternoon. Welcome to Story Time. I am Emily Reed, and I'm currently the director of the Public Library Service Division of Alabama. And we are going to be reading The Rabbit's Wedding. Just came out this year of 1959. It's actually written and illustrated by the same man who wrote Charlotte's Web, or illustrated Charlotte's Web. Two little rabbits, a white rabbit and a black rabbit, lived in a large forest. Every morning they hopped out of bed and out into the early morning sunshine. They loved to spend all day playing together. "Let's play hop, skip, and jump me," said the little white rabbit. "Oh, let's," said the little black rabbit, and with a hop, skip, and a jump, he sailed right over the white rabbit's back. Then, with a hop, skip, and a jump, the little white rabbit jumped right over the little black rabbit's back. After a while, the little black rabbit sat down and looked very sad. "What's the matter?" asked the little white rabbit. "Oh, I'm just thinking," replied the little black rabbit. Then they played hide and seek among the buttercups and daisies until the little white rabbit wanted to play find the acorn. After a while, the little black rabbit sat down and looked very sad. "What's the matter?" asked the little white rabbit. "Oh, I'm just thinking," replied the little black rabbit. Then they played race around the blackberry bush until they were tired and thirsty. So they hopped down to the spring and drank from the cool, clear water. Suddenly the little black rabbit sat down and looked very sad. "What's the matter?" asked the little white rabbit. "Oh, I'm just thinking," replied the little black rabbit. Then they played jump the daisies and run through the clover. "I'm hungry," said the little white rabbit. So they stopped playing and ate a large patch of dandelions. After a while, the little black rabbit stopped eating and sat down and looked very sad. "What's the matter?" asked the little white rabbit. "I'm just thinking," replied the little black rabbit. "What are you always thinking about?" asked the little white rabbit. "I'm just thinking about my wish," replied the little black rabbit. "What is your wish?" asked the little white rabbit. "I just wish that I could be with you forever and always," replied the little black rabbit. The little white rabbit opened her eyes very wide and thought very hard. "Why don't you wish a little harder?" asked the little white rabbit. The little black rabbit opened his eyes very wide and thought very hard. I wish you were all mine, said the little black rabbit. Do you really wish that? Asked the little white rabbit. I really do, replied the little black rabbit. Then I will always be yours, said the little white rabbit. Forever and always? Asked the little black rabbit. Forever and always, replied the little white rabbit. The little white rabbit gave the little black rabbit her soft white paw. Then they picked dandelions and put them in their ears. All the other little rabbits came out to see how happy both were, and they danced in a wedding circle around the little black rabbit and the little white rabbit. The other animals of the forest came to watch the wedding dance, and they too danced all night in the moonlight. And so the two little rabbits were wed and lived together happily in the big forest, eating dandelions, playing jump the daisies, run through the clover, and find the acorn all day long. And the little black rabbit never looked sad again. Thank you for listening to our story. What's that? State Senator Edding wants to ban that story. He called it integration propaganda. He won't pass my budget next year. We can compromise and I'll make a special section for racially motivated materials. I guess Martin Luther King's stride towards freedom wasn't allowed, and now they're going to change the rules of who can be director. The Senate Segregation Committee decided this. Now, in order to be director in Alabama, you have to be born there and attend either University of Alabama or, sorry, there's another college there that I didn't write down. But I was born in North Carolina in 1910 and raised in Culver, Indiana, and graduated from Indiana University. So now I can't keep my job. Luckily, I'm offered a position at DC Public Library, and I moved there in 1960. The American Library Association covered this whole story in their newsletter on intellectual freedom, and they were really in support of me. I was a charter member of the Freedom to Read Foundation and received the Freedom to Read Foundation's Roll of Honor Award in 2000. And I died shortly before receiving the award on May 19th, 2000. Emily's story has been featured in articles such as the ALA, the LA Times, the New York Times, and the Freedom to Read Foundation. This year, they actually wrote a new play called The Alabama Story by Kenneth Jones, and it premiered in Salt Lake City. It possibly could be coming locally soon, hopefully, or it's very tentative, but we're looking into it. But Emily's story and her bravery and her ability to stand up for what was right and what's library policy continues to inspire library workers and librarians like me. So I'm grateful to be able to present her story today. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Our next decedent is Edna Marie Tetzloff-Tabor, and our presenter is Montana Golden.
Well, hello everyone. My name is Edna Marie Tetzloff-Tabor. It's long, I know. I was born on February 21st, 1920, just a few miles south of North Judson in Pulaski County, Indiana. My parents were August and Joanna Tetzloff, and all four of my grandparents came over from Germany. I grew up in Rich Grove Township in a Sears and Roebuck home that my father put together himself. We didn't have indoor plumbing. Life was simple, but it was home. I had two older siblings, Evelyn and Eugene, who have both passed on now. For school, I started out in the county schools, and then I went to the Lutheran school in North Judson for middle school. I worked really hard, and I ended up graduating from North Judson High a year early in 1937. After that, I studied bookkeeping at the South Bend College of Commerce. In 1940, I moved to Culver, and I worked in the bookkeeping department at Culver Military Academy. That's where I met my friend Hazel Cook. Hazel's husband, Charles, was good friends with a young man named Bill Tabor. Well, Hazel introduced us, and not long after Bill came home from the Army, he and I got married. That was July 11th, 1945, at St. Peter's Lutheran Church back in North Judson. From then on, Culver was home, and Wesley United Methodist became our little church family. In 1957, Bill bought the Culver News Agency on Main Street. He ran the store, and I kept the books, mostly in the evenings and on weekends, while raising James, Robert, and William, our 3 boys. He was also a photographer. So back in those days when everything was black and white, he took the pictures, and I would hand tint them to bring out the color. You know, I always liked adding that little bit of life to his pictures. Once our boys were finally grown up, I started working at the Culver Union Township Public Library in 1974. I thought it would be something that was short term, but it turned into 32 years. I retired in 2006, and one of the things that I am most proud of is organizing the necrology file. You know, when I had first gotten there, it was just a jumble and a mess of obituaries. But now it's something that historians, genealogists, and researchers can use to this day, and that makes me so happy. In my spare time, I liked crosswords. I'd photocopy them at the library, and I'd work on them at home. I loved tending flowers and feeding the birds out back, and of course, my cats. There was always comfort in having a cat nearby. Through it all, I have been so blessed with my husband, my sons, and later my grandchildren. I have been a wife, a mother, a grandmother, a bookkeeper, a librarian, and so many other things. I've shared many meals, many laughs, and many friendships here in Culver. And I hope I will be remembered kindly as someone who cared for her family, her community, and her faith. Thank you.
Next, Arthur Judson, better known as Judd Dillon. And Gary Dillon is here to present.
Well, thank you for all of you for coming. I think it's fitting that we remember those that came before us. And they've made contributions that affect us. They've made contributions that affect us today. I've been a firm believer all my life in that if all else fails, you read the directions. Yeah, I've been a firm believer all my life that if all else fails, you read the directions. So I came up here and decided to give you a glimpse of my dad as I knew him rather than portraying this. As a reenactment. So you'll have to put up with it. You could walk away and leave, but then you'll miss her. So, but in any case, my first memories of Dad were as a farmer. We owned the land which my great-granddad bought. It was on all 4 sides of the corner of 10 and 17. It's now, most of it is owned by the Academy, and there are houses and businesses over most of it. Dad graduated from Purdue University with a degree in agriculture, and that was probably around 1942 or something like that, 1943. And he worked 2 or 3 years with his dad on the farm, and then decided to go into some other form of agribusiness. And the night before he was to take a new job, his dad unexpectedly died at the age of 55. So Dad took over and managed the farm for Grandma for a number of years, and that's where I grew up. I remember when all those areas around 10 and 17 were farmland, and I worked in those fields. And Jim Mechling is smiling over here because he and I are the same vintage. But in any case, Dad got into farming at a tough time, and Jim can vouch for the fact that back in those days, farming was tough. A lot of farmers had trouble. Dad was one of them. I never saw anybody work harder than he did, and yet he couldn't seem to get ahead. And so I wasn't surprised when I graduated from high school that he decided he was going to do something else, and he decided on teaching. And so he went back and got his teacher certification and went to work up in South Bend. You know, and I thought, man, this is a good job for him. I remember as a kid he was always reading technical journals and scientific stuff, and he'd present us with tidbits of I thought pretty useless information at the supper table, and in the car when we'd go on vacation we got a lecture in geology as we'd go by everything, you know, glaciated versus unglaciated, moraines, erosion, you name it, we heard it. And at the time I wasn't particularly enthralled, but you know, it did instill in me an appreciation for the world around me. And so teaching for Dad was a natural, it was a labor of love. I can remember him taking, oh gosh, rocks, bugs, arrowheads, stone axes, leaves, plants, you name it, they all went up to his classroom in South Bend. And he taught there for a number of years, and then I was kind of surprised he decided to come back to Culver and be a guidance counselor. Well, after I thought of it, I thought, well, this isn't too surprising. He was always dedicated to education, and he helped some of the neighborhood kids go to school. He helped finance them even back when he was farming. So he had a firm belief in the value of education for young people. So now he was in a job where he actually facilitated getting kids into school and helping them. And you know, this was more of a mission for him than it was a job. I can remember the joy that he expressed when he would tell stories of kids that he was able to get in school, kids that didn't think they could do it, kids that didn't think they could afford it, and he was able to get them going on the pathway to a better life. And he just loved that. He also had a peculiar compassion and understanding of kids. One memory that stands out to me is that a couple of my friends got into some trouble, and it came up at the supper table, and I'm thinking, oh no, here we go. And you know, all Dad said was, well, that's too bad. There was no judgment, no vitriol, no nothing. And I remember him also saying at other times, well, he's having trouble growing up. So, excuse me, I'm getting a little choked up here. But so that attitude that he had towards kids, I think, was very fitting for the profession that he chose. I don't know why he moved on to be principal of the school, but he did, and you know, he wasn't the most organized guy in the world, I can tell you that. And I've picked that up in spades, unfortunately. But in any case, he did model that care, concern, love for children, and I think when you have an educational leader doing that, you've got a lot, whether they're good in everything or not. Dad also, I'm looking at my time here, I don't want to go too far over. But Dad also loved trees. He managed our little bitty patch of woods like it was the Colorado National Forest. He planted trees on our land and for other people. I remember he planted trees down at Grace Church. You can see them. They're big old tulip trees, about 3 foot at the butt now. And I got the job of going down and watering the darn things, which I was not pleased about at that age. I'd ride my bike down and do it. But, you know, as I walk and look at that and see those big trees today, a few tears came to my eyes, you know. I think there's a lesson there for all of us. And then he taught the new school building. It looked pretty bare out there, so he planted a bunch of trees around there. And you can go see all these trees. I invite you to do that. For me, it's a touching thing. Dad was not all work. He loved to fish. And I don't know how many of you know it, but fishing is a science. Dad had a barometer in the living room, and he'd monitor the barometric pressure, the wind speed, the wind direction. He studied the feeding habits and the breeding habits of fish. And whether you know it or not, there's even a proper way to bait a hook. And I know it. But he did catch fish, and whenever we'd come home and visit, he had fish in the freezer. And when he died in a fishing boat with a fellow educator, with my two youngest children with him. And he had a fatal heart attack, and I thought it was kind of fitting. There he was with the next generation, which he dedicated years to, with a fellow educator. Well, I want to thank you for coming and taking part in honoring my dad. It means a lot to both me and my sisters who couldn't be here, and I'm sure it means a lot to the other people who've been honored here today. And so I thank you for your attention.
Wonderful, thank you. And our last decedent today is actually my great aunt, Ruth Werner, portrayed by Amy Beaucham.
So grateful you've gathered here today, close to my family's resting place, to remember and share in my story and these stories. My life began in 1910 in Morgantown, West Virginia, but Culver quickly became my home. My parents brought my family here when I was just an infant. I grew up walking these streets, laughing with my siblings, learning faith from my parents, and graduating from Culver High School. When I graduated with my heart already set that service would be my calling. I was a twin. My brother Bob and I, we were inseparable. We learned together, played together, and our twin sisters, Mary and Martha, yes, biblical names, they added to the chorus of voices in our home. Our family life was one of love and blessings, but illness was no stranger to our household. When my sister Martha was just 7, she fell ill with rheumatic fever. The doctors told my father he had a choice: leave her in the hospital or take her home to die. He brought her home, and by God's grace, she recovered. Not long after, my younger brother John broke out in this terrible rash. The doctor called it the dangest thing he'd ever seen. But we soon learned it was smallpox. My sisters Mary and Martha were home from school on break, and they lovingly sat at his bedside reading to him while he was sick. Well, they returned to Fort Wayne to school only to break out themselves about 10 days later. An old retired doctor there took one look at Martha and said, "My God, woman, you have smallpox." And he sent them both straight to the health department. They were driven back to Culver because by then my father had broken out as well. They vaccinated my mother, Bob, and me, along with half of Fort Wayne and Culver, I think. And I did not get the disease, but the scar left on my leg from the vaccination was so large, you could have dropped a silver dollar in it. The doctor had chosen my leg, not my arm, worried the scar on the arm might be just too big. He told me my reaction was so strong that surely I would have died if I hadn't been vaccinated. Our entire family was quarantined together in our apartment, and it was above the theater and my father's watchmaking store. It's where Cafe Max is now. Those days impressed upon me how fragile life is and how crucial skilled care can be. Now, a health issue I had was asthma. I remember the weight in my chest, the gasp for air, the helplessness of just waiting for relief. Years later, after working as a nurse in Toledo, I was walking near a flour mill and my asthma really flared up. It flared up so badly, I collapsed. Well, they carried me to the hospital, gave me morphine, and when I woke, 5 doctors were standing over me, and one of them asked, "Well, Missy, how was St. Peter at the pearly gates?" They told me to stay away from flour mills, and I did. Fortunately, I learned to manage my asthma by avoiding its triggers, and I lived a very active life. Now, all these moments impressed on me how illness can change lives in an instant, and how vital conscientious care truly is. The experiences gave me a foundational sympathy for anyone dealing with illness or injury, and it really influenced my desire to serve. Now, when I graduated from Culver High School, I already knew my goal was to become a nurse. While other girls from my class dreamed of ballrooms and dances, I dreamed of hospital halls and patients to care for. So when I saw an ad from St. Luke's Hospital, School of Nursing in Chicago, I begged my parents to let me go. They agreed. And I graduated in 1932. Those halls there smelled of carbolic soap, and a career in nursing demanded strict discipline, long hours, and uncompromising standards. The uniforms were stiff with starch, the caps so rigid they could stand on their own, and our shoes had to be spotless. We tended to them daily. Nursing was not something you did halfway. It was a calling, a complete devotion. From the start, I found my place in pediatrics. The children weren't just patients. They were teachers. They showed me trust and courage. Nursing also brought me my dearest friend. I met her during my career in Mississippi, where she too was a nurse. You know, everyone needs that one true friend, you know, that really, really understands you. She understood me, and she understood nursing too. The long hours, the sacrifices, and the joy. For me, my true friend was Amelia Wellman. You know, all nurses have stories, from experienced ones to those in training. One summer, I worked at the Culver summer camp in the infirmary. Well, they served tomato soup to all the campers. Well, it had gone bad. So by evening, half the camp was lined up at the infirmary with fevers and stomach aches and more. We had sick kids in bunks and tents, anywhere we could put them. You know, in moments like that, you learn that nursing isn't just a skill, It's improvising with what you have and keeping steady when others are depending on you. My early nursing career carried me across the Midwest, Texas, and Colorado. And each stop brought its own stories. In Colorado in 1937, I worked in a small miners' hospital in Fairplay, high in the Rockies. Well, our quarters were very modest, and there was a kitchen on the ground floor with a split door leading outside. Well, on my first day, I sat down to flapjacks, and suddenly the top half of the door swung open and a donkey, yes, a donkey, poked his head through the opening. And the cook immediately tossed him a flapjack, just like that. And when the donkey hee-hawed for more, she tossed him a second one, and then another. That braying and those flapjacks have stayed with me. Hospitals, I learned, hold surprises, some more amusing than others. Yeah, not every surprise for me was lighthearted. In Dallas in 1943, while working in pediatrics, I was caring for a child with diphtheria. In the middle of a tracheotomy, I managed to lean in too closely and I got sprayed. Within days, I was gravely ill. I had caught the very disease I was fighting. I nearly died. My sweet mother traveled all the way to nurse me, and by her care, I lived. Those weeks reminded me that even nurses need nursing sometimes. My career grew with my studies. I earned my BS in nursing education from the University of Pittsburgh in 1948, and I earned my master's from Memphis State, and in Memphis at John Gaston Hospital, I served as Director of Nursing Services from 1951 to 1954. It was there that came the invitation that totally changed my life. Dr. Wilson from Mississippi came to recruit me in Tennessee and asked me to help start a brand new medical center in Jackson. It was going to be called the University of Mississippi Medical Center. Imagine a campus being built from the ground up, patients soon coming through the doors, and young nurses soon to be looking to me for leadership. A woman at the table with doctors and architects, shaping corridors, classrooms, and wards. Amelia was part of the planning process as well. And we traveled to research the best, newest equipment. We approved blueprints, suggested changes that would make nurses' work easier, and also suggested changes that would make patients' care safer. We raised a hospital from bare ground. It had 750 beds. And I wasn't shy about speaking up. Once, I was the only woman in a room full of hospital managers, all men. I stood up and laid out all the problems and how to fix them. Afterward, the chief doctor whispered, "I don't think they expected you to speak." Well, I said, well, if they didn't expect me to speak, why did they invite me? Mississippi was full of turning points. I was there the night activist Medgar Evers was brought into our hospital after being shot in his own driveway. History itself came through our doors. The civil rights movement was raging outside, but inside our duty was clear. Care for every soul who entered. I was part of the effort to try to save him. Regretfully, he died within an hour of being allowed to be admitted. Medicine itself was changing too. You may remember the headlines. The chimpanzee heart transplant into a critically ill patient. It was the world's first transplant in a human performed at UMMC by Dr. James Hardy, and I was part of the surgical team. The heart beat for only 90 minutes and the patient never regained consciousness, but it was history. And though controversial, that event paved the way for all future heart and organ transplants. And then there was a night an Indian chief had emergency surgery. His people came wanting to do a medicine dance with fire right there in the hospital lobby, the brand new hospital lobby. I said, no fire in the hospital. If you like that, the whole place will burn. We finally convinced them to go outside. They danced under the stars. The chief recovered fully, and the hospital stood. These moments showed me how unpredictable nursing can be. One day you're stopping a fire, and the next you're holding someone's hand in prayer. You know, my faith carried me. Christ Lutheran Church in Jackson was my anchor. That same faith called me to serve, and as a professional, I was honored to lead. I served as president of the Mississippi Nurses Association. I sat on the Nursing Board of Examination and Registration. I joined the American Nurses Association and the National League for Nursing. Service was my compass. And one of my proudest callings was mentoring nurses' aides. Dozens of them went on to become full nurses. I pushed them, I encouraged them. One aide at John Gaston Hospital in Memphis, where I worked and taught, learned a valuable lesson about listening attentively during my instruction. You see, I supervised the polio wing at that location, and this was before vaccines, when rows of children lay inside iron lungs, machines breathing for them day and night. And when the power went out, there wasn't time to panic. Every iron lung had a manual lever type crank. You secured it, then pumped with all your might. Each pump was a breath, and every breath was a child's life. Well, one night when the power failed, I hurried to the polio ward because I knew the aide on duty had not listened carefully during training. Sure enough, there she was, behind the iron lung, fumbling with the lever, and just covered in sweat and grease. Well, I quickly stepped in, secured the lever, and pumped strongly until the power was restored. The child lived. That memory never left me. In nursing, every second counts, and so does paying attention. Even in moments like that, though, I tried to teach and nurture the nurses I trained with kindness. Once in a department store in Mississippi, a woman shouted, "Miss Werner, do you remember me? I'm the one you fired." Then she came up and hugged me. Now, if someone you had to discipline comes back to hug you, perhaps the goal of leading with kindness has truly been achieved. That goal of kindness was important to me with both patients and nurses. Amelia and I had a pact, and the whole staff honored it. No one should die alone. If a patient had no family, we all took turns keeping vigil day and night. Every life deserved kindness and dignity. Neighbors remember me mowing my lawn well into my late years. I kept it up until I was 89, and that was with a push mower. I never got winded in spite of my asthma. You know, I had joined a fitness center at the age of 80 to keep my muscles strong during the winter, and it really helped me. And I only stopped mowing after thieves broke into my shed and stole my mower. I bowled in leagues on Mondays. I drove till I was 9. But when macular degeneration made it unsafe, I knew it was time to quit. In 2001, I returned home to Culver after spending most of my life in Mississippi. Though my career had taken me far, Culver was where my roots were. I joined Christ Lutheran Church here, and I found fellowship in the same hymns that has sustained me in Jackson. I lived with my dear niece, Sally. That's Mary's daughter. And I must say, Sally was very proud of me. She was proud of my titles, the degrees, the hospital leadership, my influence on other nurses, but she also cherished the simple things about me, just my presence in her home, the stories I told in the evenings, and my fondness for her dog. Now, when Sally assisted me in returning to Mississippi for a visit, I thought a few friends might stop by. 30 nurses showed up. That told me I must have done something right. I was also blessed to attend UMMC's 50th anniversary in 2005, and many attending told me that my influence was still felt there in the halls and in the hearts of the nurses who followed. Now, that's a compliment. My twin, Bob, in his memoir, wrote of our mother's faith, our father's steadiness, and our unbreakable bond. His words were mine too. Our grandfather had been a jeweler and a watchmaker here in Culver, keeping time for the town. Our mother baked the best pies. We grew up with stories, faith, and a sense of duty. When I passed in 2006, tributes poured in. A chief nursing officer called my presence a tremendous blessing. A colleague said Amelia and I were the kind of nurses she aspired to be. And Sally, sweet Sally Ricciardi, she shared that she never met anyone who spoke with me and did not love me. My great-nephew, Jeff Kenney, Culver's historian, expressed that this town's story is not about generals and founders only, but also about women of faith and service, and that he remembered me as someone who shaped lives not by commanding armies, but by tending the sick and mentoring the next generation. Very touching. So how do I hope you'll remember me? Well, as a nurse who worked hard, spoke up when it mattered, laughed whenever she could, showed kindness, and never let anyone face the end alone. Here, where my parents and others rest, I thank you for remembering.
Well, thank you, and I just want to, I'll editorialize for 10 seconds. I think this program was a really, it's a good mix of folks who everyone in Culver arguably was influenced by here, but also folks who left Culver and influenced, the world, the country. So it was just an interesting mix.